the child goes to the teacher who will guide that child.
What do you mean by external moral authority? You use that expression a lot.
Materialism has to do with when you are
Hello, it is great to have all of you back with us for this course in Values and Spirituality. Today we will be looking at the subject of methodology, the various types of teaching methods that a teacher or an educator can employ, whether he or she is teaching young students, child students, or adult students. I have in the studio with me Sister Denise, the author of these books, to take us through what the different types of methodologies are. Sister Denise, it's fabulous having you back in the studio with us.
Thank you.
Okay, so you speak of 3 different types of methodologies. So I'd like you to go through the definitions and then we will go into what you have to say about it. Tell us what conductive methodology is.
The conductive form of pedagogy is favored by authoritarian teachers, and this is the conventional way. Teacher is boss, students have to be passive, and even the setup of the classroom and so on is designed to make the students understand that they are passive receivers of the information, and they will be tested on whether they received it. And we have an illustration of the relationship just in terms of body language. And you can see that it is quite harmful to treat a student, a child, in that way. But it's been the favored way for a long, long time. So forward-looking schools don't use it anymore, but a lot of the poor areas, the rural schools and so on, that's all they know. And it's been the way that people learn by rote. They never learn to think about what they're learning. They are discouraged from questioning it, from asking for clarification, and they are assumed to be stupid, basically, and made intelligent by this information being pushed into them. So that's the conductive methodology.
Then you go on to deductive learning. Could you define that for the viewer?
Deductive learning is better for the learning process, and in that the teacher is really there to help the student to process the ideas, and there's a certain amount of listening to the student. The student is allowed to question, to ask for clarification, will not be treated as a stupid person. And so the relationship is a little bit more egalitarian, but not completely. This method is what has been replacing the conductive method, but you know, most enlightened educators feel that it doesn't go far enough.
What does that mean? How can one take it further?
Well, taking it further means to move to the inductive methodology, and this is the one that we favor in this course.
Okay, could you define for our viewers and readers what inductive methodology is?
Well, inductive methodology is really where the teacher and the student are on a much more equal footing, and of course it's the only form of education that you can really use in an adult setting. And this is the one which really encourages the student to think out of the box, to develop their social skills, to also develop their leadership skills, because if a person is an independent thinker and thinks for themselves, then they are much more free. So there are some social attitudes which are really afraid of people becoming free in their thinking and their expression. And this is again a matter of the clash of the value systems that we talked about earlier. So the more patriarchal value system favors the conductive methodology, and the one which favors human rights and democratic principles, liberal ideas, that definitely favors the inductive method. And in research that educators have done about how people learn, you can see that the inductive method is the very best. And this is why the most enlightened teachers and school systems go for that.
What is the danger of the conductive methodology of imparting education to students?
Well, it creates a group of people or a society of people who can be manipulated, who are fear-based, because if a person is using the conductive methodology, they're also using punishment. If they see a child looking around the room or doing anything other than what is actually being told, and it really treats the students like slaves. You know, you have to do what the teacher wants or else. In the inductive method, you're really giving value to that young person as an actual human being with equal rights, and that's has a very different impact on how the person feels about themselves. And then you create a society of people who are very innovative, who are confident in their opinions, and who will listen to the voice of conscience, and who will, I think, be much more responsible about how they do things and what they do. And so the other kind of value system based on human rights, progress, and so on, that definitely favors the inductive method. And there are some subjects that need to be taught using the deductive method, where the teacher really has to give information to the child or the student. But as soon as it comes to a question of ethics, morality, values, there the person needs to be interacted with almost as an adult, you see. And of course, when we're doing adult education, then it's adult to adult. So there's no question of talking down. And the conductive method is always talking down, so that it teaches the students to feel inferior. Then when they grow up, then they get to take a superior position and make everybody else feel inferior. So that supports the kind of society where abuse is considered normal.
I didn't realize the consequences of a teaching style was so far-reaching.
Very far-reaching. Because the interaction between one person and another person, if it's a bit abusive, which I think conductive methodology really is, then it puts a person in survival, and this promotes negative behavior or antisocial behavior, because you have to protect yourself from something that you shouldn't have to protect yourself from.
When you put it like that, it sounds quite damning and quite tragic as to what we are creating in society and what foundation we are offering to young children. It sounds terrible.
Well, yes, and in older times, the archaic social attitudes created a very stratified society, and everyone on the lower rungs of society was kept there. Now the thinking is we need to be egalitarian, we need to recognize the rights of everyone, and you find that it is not the case that intelligence is only for the privileged and the And people on the lower end of the financial and social scale are by definition lacking in intelligence. It doesn't work like that.
As far as the inductive methodology is concerned, tell us how it empowers students. What does it do for them that the other systems of teaching doesn't do?
The inductive methodology opens up the opportunity for the student to develop their full potential, and it never puts them down, you see, because someone, especially a young person in an educational setting, is experimenting and offering something which within themselves feels really good, and if that gets put down, it gets damaged, and then that student will close down or shut down their creative capacity, definitely. So the inductive methodology really favors all the different attributes of personhood in the young person, and then in an adult setting, that adult may have learned at school in an atmosphere where the conductive methodology was used, and so they will not be able to function so easily in the inductive methodology. So they will really need to be shown the ropes, because a whole section of their intelligence has been shut down by that methodology.
From what I gleaned from what you just said, the conductive and deductive way of teaching students doesn't adequately prepare the child or even an adult student for adult life.
Exactly. And this is why education using those methods has really failed people.
I'm thinking of the real world, the professional environment, where you have to think for yourself. You have to protect yourself against manipulation. You have to know how to advocate on your own behalf and on behalf of others. All of these skills cannot be learned if this was done to you from the day you're born.
Well, you see, in the system of society which corresponds to archaic social values, everything was designed to keep that section of people down because they didn't want the competition. So it's not a level playing field. As soon as you start using the inductive methodology, then it means that everyone on the playing field has to score in terms of intelligence, capacity, and so on, and they cannot be using privilege or playing the card of family background, wealth, or whatever to get a position for which they're not qualified. And so in the conductive methodology, it favors nepotism, favoritism, all of these things, whereas the inductive methodology favors the idea of a meritocracy.
Nice word. Tell us what that means.
That means those who merit, those who have the skills and have developed their skills, those who have the competencies, they take the positions and do the jobs, fulfill the professional positions. You see, your work environment is not going to be very successful if you have people on top who don't have competency and they were put there through questionable means. And the people at the bottom who may be very skilled, very competent, they're blocked from positions of responsibility. So from the angle of liberal human rights-based values, that would be considered a dysfunctional system, you see. So always we're favoring these kinds of values over the archaic social values, but nevertheless there is plenty of room in such man-made systems for manipulation to occur. And this is why throughout the course I bring in the idea of knowledge of karma philosophy, because when you're applying those laws which originate, you can say, in the natural world and are articulated by the divine, then you're working with something that is not man-made, which means it's not limited and it's not going to change according to convenience.
As I'm listening to you, I find that I'm quite astounded by the fact that how one gets taught matters as much as, if not more, than the content of what one is taught. This is not something that most people even think about, because as children, we're taught that your teachers is right and that you must respect your teachers and not even question not what they say, but how they say it.
Well, this all belongs to the value system that corresponds to archaic social values. But now, in the modern world, students feel that if their teacher is lacking in competency, that they have a right to say something about it. So the question of a young person having a sense of their rights and the right to good quality education. You see, in the past, people used to think that if they are not very good at a particular subject, the problem lies with the student. Nowadays, you're seeing that if the students are not very good at a subject, well, it can just as well be the fault of the teacher. And a good teacher makes the subject relevant, makes it alive, and really shows people how to learn that subject. And unfortunately, partly because of very low pay and inadequate preparation of the teachers, you very rarely get really good teachers. And then the students are penalized for the inadequacies of the teachers. But in the inductive methodology, the inadequacies of the teachers are not so problematic, because if a student feels that the teacher doesn't understand the subject so well, then they'll go together to the source of information and work together on that, so that even the teacher becomes better at the subject. And the student maintains their confidence and also doesn't look at the teacher as incompetent, because otherwise it would be a reversal of the roles of conductive methodology. And many people who advocate the conductive methodology are afraid of this role reversal. And so, like the example I give, what happened to Albert Einstein is he just got thrown out of school for asking questions.
If somebody who's listening to you right now is a student of a teacher who does practice conductive methodology and knows that it's not working for him or her, whether the student is an adult or a child, what does he stand to do? Because it seems that in conductive methodology, the student is almost in the position of being a victim.
Absolutely. The student is victimized by that system and penalized.
Okay, so what does he stand to do, one student in a class?
It just depends the age of the student, their social situation, how educated the parents are, the intelligence level of the student. There are many factors to take into consideration. But such students would usually be considered rebellious, and they would be penalized for being rebellious. And in fact, their rebelliousness is another word for they're too clever for this and we're not able to limit them. So they call rebelliousness bad, against the social values and so on, and they will marginalize that intelligent student, which, if you look at it in the long term, is not very intelligent, because if you have very intelligent, competent young people coming into the education system, these are your potential leaders, these are your potential people of excellence in the different professions. So they really ought to be encouraged rather than pointed out as deviant.
I'm thinking of the particular aspect of criticism. I think that history is full of examples of students who were criticized, often unfairly, by teachers, which criticism has caused a shocking amount of damage in the life of a student, especially if it's a child. You internalize the criticism and you believe the words of the person who's criticizing you, if it's a teacher or a parent, and think that you are incompetent, stupid, will never amount to anything, etc. How does one in a position of being a victim offset criticism to believe your own inner voice rather than the voice of an external power figure?
Yes, or an external moral authority. You know, I can point to my own personal experience in school. I learned differently, I thought differently, I didn't agree with half of the things that were being said. So I was definitely classified as a rebellious type. And so I was very interested in reading, so I would read outside the curriculum. And I would think that the teachers are not very bright. And but at the same time, because I didn't do what they wanted and I wasn't what they wanted and so on and so forth, they definitely penalized me. But what was helpful for me is that I had a lot of faith in myself. So I didn't internalize the things that they were saying completely. There were some things they would say that I did consider to be right, but which later I thought, no, that is ridiculous, that is not right. I'm processing thought, and they are penalizing me for not regurgitating what they say, but I was busy analyzing, well, is this true? Do I agree with this? Why are these people wanting me to state something that is against my conscience or that I don't believe is true? Things like this, you see. So I know what it's like for students who are not, fitting in with the usual system. But I had a lot of confidence in my own thinking, and so I was quite happy to be on the side or a little bit marginalized.
I do not know many 6-year-olds who had the self-respect that you do. Okay, I'm glad that you were able to withstand the criticism that came in your direction. What would your advice be to those who do not have the wherewithal to resist such verbal onslaughts?
Well, of course, you know, as you are in school, you start school around 4 or something, and you're still there by the time you're 17. And then, you know, you want higher education, so then you go into a different environment. And when I went into the university environment, the university I studied at was a very modern one for England. It was a completely new type of education. And they were doing experiments with new forms of learning mathematics and all of this. So it was interesting for me to be there at a time of transition, of times of learning. And the other thing that I appreciated greatly is that we had very small groups with a very intelligent, competent tutor. We would call them tutors. And we would have roundtable discussions. And I really did well with that, you see, because there I could really come into my own and my opinions were listened to and considered. But I usually found myself spending time with the postgraduates, the doctoral students, even though I was an undergraduate, because I could relate much better to their relationship with learning and study and so on. So I've always been a bit of an anomaly, but I think there are a lot of people who are anomalies, and they have to figure it out, because the society is usually not going to help very much.
I think we'll call today's discussion to an end. It's been actually quite fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you.
So there you go. Conductive methodology, deductive methodology, and inductive methods of teaching. For most of us who haven't heard this before, this would be a very interesting and fresh way of looking at the education system. And I think one just has to look at one's own life to realize that perhaps the teachers that we had did the best they could with what they had, but it didn't necessarily work for you either as a child or as an adult. And what we learned from Sister Denise today is that when a student and teacher are on the same level, in other words, like this as opposed to this, then the student stands to gain more because the student feels respected. So on your behalf, I really wish to thank Sister Denise.
Thank you.
For sharing what you did. And also, if you're an educator or a student, look at the way you have been learning and ask yourself whether you can shift it so that you can absorb as much as possible in whatever course of study you choose to embark, whether it's values or otherwise. Thank you so much for joining us this half hour. Take care and goodbye.